Hello and welcome everyone to the Theology Mom podcast. I am so glad to have you here today for this very important conversation that I've been wanting to do for a while now. So I'm very excited to bring this to you. And as we do that, I do want to let you know to make sure that you are subscribed both on YouTube and wherever you stream your podcast. This is one you are going to want to share definitely with your pastor and probably your friend group, your small group at your church. This is going to be a very important conversation, an empowering and equipping conversation. And I am really excited to have you here. Recently, my friend Jeremy Bannister, he's a pastor in New Mexico. Many of you know him. He's been on my podcast before, coming on again soon. He wrote me a long email just with his pastor's heart, sharing a burden that he has. And he asked me to consider doing this podcast because he is seeing so many parents in his congregation struggle. And he was asking the question in his letter to me is it time for Christian parents to abandon the public school system? So we're going to try to tackle that question today. And we've done that a number of different ways on past podcasts, past conversations. So you'll want to go to my channel if you want to hear other aspects of it. I have a whole playlist there on education. But what we're going to do today is focus on an action plan and to help you think about some options and some next steps, even if you're feeling stuck. Like, I don't necessarily want to keep my kid in public education, but I don't know what my alternatives are, or I'm feeling very stuck about it. We want to help maybe get your imagination going a little bit. Now, before we get into that conversation, I want to clarify something very important about what I'm not saying today. What we're not saying is that Christian teachers should necessarily abandon the government school system. If God has put a call on your life to be a teacher in the government schools, I bless you. I hope you have a church community that is supporting you, praying for you, encouraging you, cheering you on. Please make sure that you are connected with my friends at christianeducators.org. David Schmoose and his team there can help provide support for you. Let them be a resource for you as you are a missionary to bring light to a dark place. This is not what this show is about. This is not about denigrating teachers, especially Christian brothers and sisters who God has put a call on their life to work in the government school system. Okay, so this is not a show about you in any way, shape, or form. What this is a conversation about children. This is a strategy discussion about how to help educate children who are vulnerable to being sent into government schools, because that is not a place that is designed to protect their innocence. At the risk of sounding completely redundant, our children are exposed to the ideas of the critical social theories in some form in nearly every inch of their lives. Their classrooms, on social media, on streaming platforms, in movies, and even in some of their churches. Okay? We have covered those topics elsewhere. You can go watch the long conversation I did, the education mega episode with our friend Kelly Ski about all of those kinds of issues and receipts. And I will be having Kelly on again to continue more of that conversation very soon. But this brings me to the big idea of today's discussion. I believe that the next great ministry opportunity for the church is to make it our mission to pool our resources and create a place of refuge for parents who simply want to have a place for their children to get a solid education that doesn't attempt to indoctrinate their children against their faith, but instead builds our children's faith and their education on a firm foundation. And in this podcast, I want to encourage churches to harness your power to become a catalyst in your local community to offer creative new solutions. Now, if Krista ruled the world, every church in America would open a school, even if it's a micro school or a homeschool co-op, so that every family in that local congregation who wants to remove their child from government schools can do it. But this means we're going to need to think creatively. We're going to have to provide solutions that also include and don't leave behind people like single parents and low income families. We don't want our solutions to be so narrow that those people are left behind, because those children in those families matter too. They have dignity, value, and worth too. And we want to think about, we won't touch on this in this podcast per se, but it's something we do need to think about, is how we can also serve our families who have children with special needs. Now, this is a tall order. I don't have all these answers, but we need to start somewhere to have this conversation. So I've asked my friend Gheorghe Rosca Jr. from Protect Our Kids to come back. He's been on the All the Things show before, to give us an update about his efforts to encourage and empower pastors and parents to start schools in their local churches as an alternative to government schools and a refuge for our children. And with that, I want to say welcome, Gheorghe.
Thank you for having me, Krista.
It's great to have you here. I'm so glad you were able to come and we could do it in person.
Yes,
Yeah.
finally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I enjoy having people face to face, because then we're not talking on each other, and it just seems a little more friendly, more personable.
I completely agree.
So now tell us a little bit about what you do at Protect Our Kids, and just a little brief recap of what we covered the first time we talked to you. You call it the triple threat of government schools, and the threat that imposes on our kids. So maybe just give us a little recap on that.
So that's our elevator speech, the triple threat, because we are constantly trying to get parents to understand very quickly on what's wrong with our government schools. And a lot of them just don't believe us.
Yeah.
So to keep it simple, we call it the triple threat. First is sex and gender theory. Second is critical race theory. And the third one is social emotional learning. And each one of these topics is actually undergirded by what you call the critical social theories. Mm-hmm. It's a worldview. So in sex and gender theory, it's about comprehensive sexuality education. It's no longer just biological sex education focusing on anatomy. It's bringing in the whole gender spectrum. In critical race theory, it's all about putting up the oppressor versus oppressed categories under race, right? And then in social emotional learning, which is the latest trend in public schools, it's all about teaching the values that the critical social theories aspire to, and basically infusing them in every curricula. It could be history, it could be math, it could be science. You will start to see all of those values now being propagated everywhere.
Very good. And I want to let people know that we have longer versions of each of those topics on our channel. You can go check that out. Again, there's a whole playlist about critical race theory and diversity, equity, inclusion, and social emotional learning on my channel at TheologyMom. And you can get all of our past conversations. I even have a whole episode, a crash course on social emotional learning. So if that's new for you, no worries. We're going to get you caught up on that. But I think that what you bring up there is very important, because many parents don't believe you at first.
Correct.
They often will say, well, not in my district. I'm living in rural Wyoming. We don't have these problems. But what I always say to that is, yeah, but if it's not there today, which it probably is already, you just don't know it, it's coming soon.
Or the other argument is the teachers' unions are everywhere. Mm. And so they are the ones that are pushing all of this. So regardless of blue state, blue county, red county, it's there already.
Yeah. And so I always emphasize it's important for them to go on their school district website and look for some of those key words like equity,
Yes.
or you can just type that in, equity. You can type in things like um, race or racism to see how they're defining those terms. Those are common ones. I think about gender is another key
Mm-hmm.
search term people can look for. Parents' rights is
Parents.
another one, because these, they don't always make it completely transparent for you to
Correct.
find out. Sometimes you even have to ask.
And you have to dig deep because it's not going to be on the front page. It'll be
Yes.
like 10 clicks away somewhere.
Yeah. And it's probably not going to be under the banner of here's what we teach about queer theory.
Correct.
It's usually couched in language like belonging and inclusion and a lot of other pretty words.
Culturally appropriate history or
Yeah.
ethnic studies.
Yeah. So, okay, so those are some good tips. Now, what we're going to talk about today is really unfolding of, we want to let people know there's a free resource on your website about starting a school. So why don't you tell people up front, like, how to get that free resource and kind of a snapshot of what we're going to be digging into today.
Sure. And so, really, the impetus, Krista, of why we even created the resource was back in 2019, we started going up and down the state of California doing conferences in churches, just warning parents and pastors about what's going on. And every single time we were doing that, we got the question of, well, what can we do about it? Stop just telling us the problem.
Right.
Give us a solution. So that started this whole process of, okay, well, let's think through how can we solve this problem. And so it's a short booklet, about 20 pages long, very colorful. So it's not something that you will fall asleep reading. But it's a 10-step process that we outline for pastors on here are the steps you could be taking right now in your church to bring some kind of an alternative school model into your church.
Okay, so Bob's going to put it up on the screen here for us and walk us through like how to find the resource and what to look for.
Yeah, so this is the landing page for our website. On the top right-hand side is the menu.
So you're going to go to protectourkidsnow.org and then click on the top right-hand side. My website developer calls that the hamburger at the top.
Exactly. And then you go to For Pastors, because this is specifically targeting them.
Okay.
And so we have a very short page because I understand pastors are very busy. They don't have a lot of time, right? So if you just scroll down a little bit, you'll see 4 short videos on the left-hand side and 2 brochures on the right-hand side.
Okay.
So the brochure here with the pretty little child here, The Church's Calling and Education.
Okay.
If you click on that, that will open up this 20-page pamphlet.
Great. Awesome. So people can go there and we're going to unfold the conversation, but they can get a little bit more there as an action step that maybe they can even share with their own pastor.
Yes, we highly encourage you to download this. In fact, on our website, we also have a brochures tab, and you can go and request us to send you hard copy brochures. We'll send them by mail.
Okay, great. So I think that I did a little informal survey on my Facebook page in preparation for our conversation. And it seemed like a lot of the feedback that I got from parents was that removing their kids from government schools almost feels like an impossible dream. They like, well, I would do it, but I lack confidence that I can really teach my child. Or I would do it, but, we're a 2-income family, or I'm a single parent. And so for them, it just felt like there's these obstacles that they weren't really sure how to get past. I think especially low-income families and single parents. Christian school tuition is often out of reach for a lot of these middle-class families. So tell us maybe a little snapshot of your vision to encourage churches to help fill this gap and break the government school monopoly.
So one of the biggest things we heard from pastors up and down California was bending the cost curve. Because in California, high school typically costs you around $20,000
Yeah.
per child per school year. Elementary school and junior high is roughly half of that. But that was the first place where we wanted to target a model that pastors could use to really bend that cost curve down. The other thing to understand is also as a pastor, as a church that's considering doing something like this, don't bite off more than you can chew, or don't try to solve all the problems all at once.
Okay.
You really have to start off with something small. And so that something small, maybe for your church, could be, well, this is going to be for our families only. But we are going to then grow that into expanding it to our local community, and then grow it from there to having a better solution for low-income families. So you have to take these progressive steps, but our encouragement is start somewhere.
Okay.
Because when you do start somewhere, you are actually having a huge impact on that government school. Why? Because every child, at least in California, is a dollar sign to our teachers union. They are somewhere around $20,000 per child per school year that our taxpayer dollars are going into funding the government school monopoly. And so you multiply that by, let's say, 30 to 35 children per classroom, and that's one teacher, right? One teacher that's in that classroom, which is typically part of the union in California, they're paying probably about $1,300 per year to their teachers union. And that teachers union is then turning around and using that funding, what I call is punching me in the gut as a parent.
Yeah.
Every single day, because that's all they do full time, is they create policies that go against my values. And so by pulling kids out, you are now, if you pulled 30 kids out, you've basically eliminated one teacher from the public school system, which you've eliminated $1,300 in union funding. Now you multiply that by what we've seen through COVID, which across the country, it's been at least on the low end, about 1.5 million kids that have been removed from the public school system. You multiply that by the dollar signs for students and for teachers, and how much we are able now to defund the teachers union. This is all part of a greater strategy. It's not just of, yes, step one, we have to protect our kids. But step two, there are great ramifications that happen on the other side.
And I want to let people know too, while you're talking about those dues that so many teachers pay into the union, there is an alternative.
There definitely is.
Our friends at christianeducators.org, for example, you can if you work in the public school system, you can actually redirect your union dues to them, and then you're investing that into their advocacy on your behalf, and they'll provide support, and you're not funding the unions.
Exactly.
So it's another way to kind of help break the monopoly, which is really another aspect of the strategy.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
And we have to keep in mind that global strategy, because the other side thinks that way. We don't think that way, but we need to.
Okay, so churches, I think, are such an important local resource, because there you've already got people who are like-minded. They can get together and try to do something. I kind of liken it to the pregnancy resource centers that are everywhere. That was something that many local churches decided, hey, we're going to do something in our community as an alternative to the Planned Parenthood monopoly. So they got together, pooled resources, built a lot of pregnancy resource centers, to the fact now that, they're all over the country.
Yeah.
And that was something we did without government help, without government instruction, as to provide a positive alternative. In my mind, this is the kind of imaginative thinking that we need to be trying to partner together as Christians in local churches, and working together to provide alternatives for our kids.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree with that, Krista. And in fact, what are those critical, imperatives or ideals, right, that we should aspire to? and it all starts with what is your mission and what is your statement of faith. Okay. That's going to have to be at the base, at the foundation of whatever alternative school you're going to provide. Because really, the public schools have that same thing. They have a clear mission, and they have, in our day and age, a statement of faith. And it's all the critical social theories and the underlying worldviews of that. Secondly, I would say is figure out your target audience. Is the first 2-3 years of your alternative school the target audience just the people in your church, right? That's fine. But define that.
You don't have to solve every problem all at once.
Exactly.
Okay.
We have to start off with steps. So is it church families? Maybe you have a larger church that is able to support something beyond that. And so you're thinking now, not just your church community, but the community around your church too.
Okay.
The other thing that I would say is, how many grades are you going to start off with? Is it going to be a K through third grade maybe for the beginning? You want to start by looking at your most vulnerable population. Because what we're seeing now in public schools is these critical social theories are making their way all the way down to preschool.
Yeah.
And a preschooler does not have the ability to debate with their teacher. In fact, we as Christian parents teach our children to obey and to listen to their teachers, right? Yeah. So that authority figure in the classroom, that they are to respect, they're taking everything as gospel, right, from their mouth. So my advice to a local church would be protect your most vulnerable, because starting a K through 12 is a huge endeavor. Yeah. But what you could do is start off small, maybe a K through 3 or K through 6th grade to capture all of elementary. And then as a pastor, I would also start a very intensive discipleship program with my junior high and high school students, teaching them about all of the critical social theories, their underlying doctrine, and how to dispute it. So that way, when they do go into public schools, they're able to detect the truth from the lie.
That's really good. So I like what you said there. Starting that foundation is, what do we believe? What's our mission? Who's our target audience? These are vital things. When we started the Center for Biblical Unity, that was almost the first thing we did.
Yes.
Was I worked on writing out the statement of faith. I worked out our principles, talking about, our positions on various social issues. So it was very transparent up front. People know why we're here, what our mission is. People need to know that stuff. It can't just be kind of vague, like, we're going to love our neighbor. Okay, that's great.
Correct.
I'm all for loving my neighbor, but I got to know
how.
Well, how am I defining that? Yeah. So, yeah, that's good. So when we get those kind of, as you call them, critical imperatives on the table, we have our mission. Let's get into some practicals. What do you see as kind of the first step of the church leadership team that, what do they need to do to start making this church-based school a reality?
Yeah, step 1 is form a team.
Okay.
Don't think that one person can do this all on their own.
All right.
You have to form a team. And that team, we always say and recommend that it should be somewhere between 3 to 6 people. You can't just have too large of a committee, because then you'll die by committee. Okay. But not too small to where it just is going to become impossible for them to carry the load. And then within that team, have a champion. And that champion has that clear vision, will take the vision that the team articulates and puts, pen to paper. But that is going to be the champion that's going to be driving action items, next steps, understands the schedule for delivering of the future steps. But then also have a kind of a co-champion, which we also call like your administrative support co-champion, because there are just so many administrative things that you need to keep tabs on right now. You're starting a school, right? So there's going to be a lot of paperwork involved, documentation that needs to be accurately filed. And so you need somebody that's very savvy when it comes to document control. So step 1 is start off with that team and make sure that team is in it for the long run.
I'm imagining there's going to need to be some kind of business plan, because there's going to be tuition payments involved, and you're going to have to make sure that costs are covered, even if you're trying to keep them kind of minimal.
Correct. So after you have your team, we talked about the mission. Step 3 is really choose a school model, because that school model is now going to feed into the business plan.
Okay.
Right. So you want to understand, are you doing a conventional private school? Because that business model is going to look very different. So choose a school model first. Think through, is it a private school? Is it a more of a private school satellite program? Are you just going to do a homeschool co-op for now? Yes, your church might have the building and the facilities and multiple classrooms, right? But you're not ready yet to take on the full administrative load of making it a private school.
Okay.
So you're going to do more volunteer-based, right? Parents who have already been in the homeschooling community, who really understand. There's maybe an influx of parents who have never done that before, so they would be, bringing their kids to church, and the parents who have already been doing it, they're teaching them. There could be even a hybrid model with a combination of remote learning, right? So not everything gets done on site. So first, choose your model, and then go on to figuring out then the business plan associated with it.
That makes sense. So I'm even thinking in that mix could be, I know we get a lot of letters from the ministry of people who used to work in public education until recently, but who have left because they just felt like they couldn't take it anymore. Those people might be lurking in some of these congregations, that they might be a resource to help that group get started, or might even be willing to oversee some of the tutorials or that kind of a thing.
This happens all the time, Krista. In fact, we just got an email to our ministry not even a month ago by a teacher from the Bay Area who found out about us and shared all of this stuff with his pastor. And he has this passion now and a vision to start an alternative school. Who better than him, right? He's a teacher. At Protect Our Kids, our director of alternative schooling is a brother who came out of the public school system. He was a teacher, assistant principal, assistant superintendent. He's kind of worked his way up through the ranks, and now is in basically early retirement because he just couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah.
And this is what he is leading within our team. So he has all of that knowledge, and he's using that now to help Protect Our Kids, help pastors understand how to put all of this stuff together.
That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about funding and tuition, because I know that's an issue on many people's minds. When we think about, let's run through some of those options again. There's a homeschool co-op that's more volunteer based. So that's going to be probably the cheapest option. And then there's a satellite, I forget what it's a PSP.
A PSP, a private school satellite program.
Yeah, and we have that in California. I don't know what other states do, but it's a way of homeschooling your child, but you're kind of under the covering of a school. And that, when I was homeschooling, we went through a PSP for a couple of years. It's cheaper than a full Christian school, but it's kind of an in-between option.
Yep.
Yeah. And then there's the full Christian school. So I like your approach of like, choose your model, and we don't have to solve every problem all at once, but we're moving towards solutions.
Correct. So in that choosing your model, you have, like you said, we bracket it. So private school, probably your most expensive. Just start off with encouraging homeschooling, your cheapest option. We've run those numbers, and for, let's say, if you want to start like a K through 6 program in your school, in your church, if you go a full-on private school model where that means you have 7 classrooms, so you need 7 teachers, you're probably running at about 15 to 20 kids per class. So you look at all of the expenses of 7 teachers plus a principal, plus you're going to have somebody doing the accounting behind the scenes, as well as a secretary. So all of a sudden you're talking about like 10 staff members, right?
That's a lot That's a lot of
So
money.
that's where your biggest costs come in.
Yeah.
It's your staff, right? Um, and so with that kind of a model, you're talking about anywhere between 800,000 to $1 million per year to run, which then you divide it by the amount of students. So probably somewhere around the 120 to 140 students. And so if you want to spread that load out, we're talking about somewhere between $7,000 to $8,000 per child per school year. Now that's still, I would say, on the lower end of
Yeah.
what we see,
Yeah.
because usually you're talking $10,000 to $11,000 per child. So you've already bent that cost curve down because your church is providing the facilities. So in those numbers that I just mentioned, we do not calculate utilities and
Insurance.
insurance and all that, because
Yeah.
the church is covering all of that. So even if you want to go that full-on private school route, you as a church have just bent that cost curve by easily $2,000 to $3,000 per year. If you want to bend that even further, now you're talking about, well, maybe in your church you do have retired school teachers who are already getting their pension,
Oh, I have pension. Yeah.
right? And so they will be more than happy to come in and do this as a ministry. So now that's where you can start bending that cost curve even more. Or you might have just some parents in the room who are maybe affluent business folks, and they want to donate towards the school because they see this as a ministry, bending that cost curve even more. So what we've seen is that if you can bring that cost curve somewhere to that $4,000 mark, you'll have a much greater degree of success of attracting more people. You're not going to get that low income community yet issue resolved. That we can take and resolve it in the next step, in the next phase. But at least for families who have 2, 3, 4 children, imagine if you're just paying one tuition at $10,000 to $12,000, as opposed to if it's $4,000, you're getting in 2 or 3 kids already.
Yeah.
Which is what most people are in that boat. So that's where we try to encourage churches to try and see if they can create that $4,000 to $5,000 per child.
That's good to think about. And just, I like the creative ideas there of, well, maybe there's some retired teachers, maybe there's some business people, because this is the kind of creativity that we have to have. We know the end goal. All right, we want to make alternative education a possibility for as many families in our church that want it.
Correct. Yeah.
So how are we going to do it? That's the end goal. Now, what are the creative solutions we need to harness to try to help us get there? But see, this is where I think the pastor's leadership and vision is so important, because I think the world is changing.
Yes.
And in your experience in working with pastors and being a pastor, do you think that there has to be some different thoughts that pastors are going to have of how to shepherd? Like maybe how to shepherd when things were a little bit more politically neutral was different than how it's going to be now, that we need to make some adjustments at the pastoral level in our thinking.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Krista. And here are some things that I had to change in my own mind. So my background is I was born and raised in Romania under the communist regime of Nicolae Ceausescu. My parents suffered extremely for the faith. My dad was even imprisoned for the faith. And we had no choice during that time in Romania. There was only one school you could go to, and that was the government school. And so we know from Scripture that where sin abounds, grace abounds. And, my dad comes from a family of 10. He's the eldest of 10. And I come from a family of 12. I'm the eighth of 12. And so when I look at my older brothers and sisters, when I look at my aunts and uncles and my parents, they were all raised in that public school system where it was very aggressive, anti-Christian. And yet all of them have still kept the faith. There was no option. But here in America, we have an option. And so now all of a sudden, when I, as a parent, praying to God and saying, Lord, help me figure out what to do, with my kids. It's no longer like, hey, I get it. This is the only option. I'm going to protect your kids there.
Yeah.
The Lord's giving you an option. You can homeschool. You can do this. You can do that. Right. So now it's our responsibility as parents to make those wise choices and not just to say, well, the Lord's going to protect them.
Yeah.
Now, everybody's case is different. I grew up then late, for the most part, my life here in America. And so my parents couldn't afford 12 private school tuitions.
Right.
So our only option was the public school. And God knew that. And God protected us there. And my parents discipled us heavily. And none of us have lost our faith. But you have to look at your situation. If God has given you the means and the way to protect your children, and He's given you the affluence you need to be able to afford all of that, or maybe you need to start sacrificing a little bit, something that maybe as most Americans haven't been used to, then that's your responsibility. God places that on you, and you can't just pray and ask the Lord for protection when He's given you a lifeboat.
So when we think about this, I really want to emphasize this piece, though, of my hope through this conversation is to encourage pastors to catch a vision of, even if they haven't seen starting a school as part of their pastoring responsibilities.
Correct, yes.
It might need to start being on their radar. It might need to start being part of their church culture.
I encourage pastors to read a book called The Third Education Revolution by Vishal Mangalwadi.
I really want to get him on my podcast.
You have to.
I'm working on it, yeah.
Because I think that even though 5 years ago I started working in this space, I think Vishal really helped me to kind of make it a full vision of what this needs to look like.
Yeah.
And what a pastor's responsibility, or just the churches in general, under the Great Commission of what it means to teach as part of the Great Commission. Teach them, to obey my commandments. And so I would highly encourage pastors to pick up that book, or just to at least go on YouTube and listen to an interview with Vishal.
Yeah.
And in an hour, I think he'll convince you that we really need to start thinking this way.
Very good. Okay, well, let's good little side conversation, because all right, now I want to maybe talk to you about churches that have done this successfully. I know that you've worked with in various capacities with a lot of different people, but maybe you could give us a couple of examples of churches that have successfully done this and what that looks like for them.
Yeah, so we've been working with three small to mid-sized churches in Orange County. And over the last 3 years, 3 years ago, the first one started working with us. 2 years ago, two more. And so we're going on right now in our third year. And with all three churches, it's starting off small. And it's starting off with a lot of volunteers, a lot of former teachers, or sometimes even current teachers. Who are adjusting their schedules to be able to come in. So this calendar year, we just finished off with 45 students across those three schools. They are right now more of an independent learning center. So these volunteers, we have over 60 volunteers who come in and teach different parts of the curriculum, if it's math, if it's science, if it's arts, social studies, things like that. There are no paid staff. So under this model that these three churches have adopted, they are just going the full volunteer route. And they're all part-time volunteers, but we do have 3 full-time volunteers on each campus, because those are the ones that are organizing all of the other volunteers, right? When they need to come in. And in terms of, teaching, it's not a full-blown 5 days a week. It's more of a 3 days a week that they're doing. But so far, we've had some very good success, again, starting small and just growing from there. But the success is also measured in the impact that you have on these children's lives, because some of these children are coming from non-believing families, and some of these we've already been seeing these families giving their lives to the Lord. We've had about 5 families to date that have accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And so, again, this is what these churches are doing. They've opened it up to beyond just their own church family, and they're trying to serve their communities. So that model will look, different from place to place. But together with our director of alternative schooling that I mentioned before, we're guiding them, every step of the way, and hopefully sooner rather than later, they can just go off and fly on their own.
That's awesome. So can people reach out to you and, get some more expertise and, engage in some problem-solving conversations with your team?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay.
And we highly encourage you to do that. Just go on the Contact Us page on our website at protectourkidsnow.org. And here's what we can do for you. We're a small team, but we're a mighty team. And we've actually just done this at my own church. Because I brought in our team to come in and to speak in front of our board and to give a presentation of everything you and I just talked about, and obviously in a little more detail.
Yeah.
But it allowed our board to ask and grill us with as many questions and concerns that they had. And then after they did that, they went off and spent a couple more weeks praying and thinking over the decision, and praise God that they made the decision to actually start off with something. And so we're looking at my church at starting off a K through 6 school. Again, something smaller, something that our board felt like we could accomplish with the resources that we have. So that decision is going to look very different for everyone, but we can help you think through all of that.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that many people, we have a tendency to just look at the obstacles, and I want to encourage people to get it to a commitment of the outcome first.
Yes.
Because if you get to a commitment on the outcome, the resources, the Lord has a tendency to bring the resources. But let's not be in so much scarcity that all we do is look at the obstacles, and I find this time and time again to be true in my life, is once I get to the commitment, if the Lord is in that commitment, he'll bring all of the resources that are needed for that.
Amen.
So, yeah.
Amen. And I tell pastors, we probably use a lot of this saying, where the Lord guides, he provides.
Yeah.
Well, now we have to start believing in that saying.
That's right. One of the most frequent obstacles that people bring up whenever we talk about, this kind of alternative school model is the issue of insurance. I've talked to many homeschoolers that are like, I tried to talk to my pastor about maybe starting a co-op at our church and being able to broaden it to more families and inviting more families into it. And they're just like, the obstacle of using the building and the insurance and having people there. Do you find like that these are typical obstacles that people run into with pastors, and maybe some thoughts about how to get past that?
Yeah, so it's a very typical obstacle. In fact, we discuss it at length in our step 9.
Okay.
Because we've seen this come up so much. A lot of times it's overthought. You're overthinking it. Because if you think about how many kids you have during Sunday school on a Sunday, and how many people you have on your grounds during any other kind of event, or let's even go for maybe like the big time events or harvest festivals, or
community outreach
outreach events. Yeah. Nobody's asking themselves in that board meeting, do we have the insurance to do? Typically, the answer is yes. You probably already have the insurance that covers that kind of activity. Now, obviously, if you're going to be running a full-blown private school,
right,
that you're going to want to look a little bit more closely into than if you're just running a hybrid model or a homeschool co-op, okay? Because the insurance requirements are going to differ. But From my understanding, is that is a hurdle that is not insurmountable, and it's not as big as most people think it is.
Okay. That's good to know because that's probably the number one question we get when we have this conversation. So I'm thinking about some of these as startups as they're getting going, they might need a little bit of help or coaching along the way. Besides reaching out to your team, what other resources might they look for?
Yes, recently, Krista, we've actually been introduced to an organization called the Herzog Foundation, and they are providing support for schools that have already started. And their ministry is to support those schools and to get them to become mature. And they do it in two ways. First way is they just ask you to send your team, usually 2 or 3 people, buy yourself a round trip ticket from wherever you are to Kansas City. Once you are there, they will house you, they will feed you, and they'll get you in a 3-day seminar. And those seminars happen every week throughout the year on different topics. So if you need help with marketing or fundraising, or if you need help with recruiting or whatever topic you need help with, they are there to provide you that professional development. But then they also take it a step further because they realize that every one of these schools have a unique model, and they want to pair you up with a mature school that's been around probably for 10, 15, 20 years, and that is the closest to the model that you are starting, and set you up in this mentor protege relationship. That way you are not just on this journey alone, and that somebody could be there walking beside you that has already done it before.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So remind us again, I'm going to have Bob put the website up of how people can stay in touch with you and all of that. I don't know if you guys are on social media too. If you are, you can share that as well.
Yes, we definitely are. So protectourkidsnow.org. That's our website. We also have a YouTube channel. And on our YouTube channel, we have a lot of videos on every one of these triple threats, and videos also on other topics. We even have a how to homeschool video and taking you step by step. And hopefully one of these days we can actually take this how to start an alternative school and convert it into a video as well. But the conversation there just needs to be very tailored per church. So it's kind of hard to create that. We're on Facebook, so you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Twitter. We just recently opened up Twitter because we're seeing a lot of good things coming up with free speech there. So we want to make sure our message is being sent across the Twitterverse as well. But YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and our website, you should be able to find most of the stuff that you need.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for coming, George.
Thank you, Krista.
This has been fun. And I want to encourage each and every one of you parents to prayerfully consider your responsibility before the Lord for your child. I love what George said earlier about, your responsibility. Be proactive, protect the vulnerable. But I also want to encourage you to think creatively. Don't just see the obstacle, see the possibility of what could be, and trust the Lord to bring some provision for you. He has resources that I have often found in my life I didn't even know were available until I got committed to what it is that He had for me. So with that, I want to just encourage you, go check out George's YouTube channel at Protect Our Kids. You can check out my channel at TheologyMom for more resources on these themes. Make sure to share this podcast with your pastor and your friends who you're already maybe homeschooling with to help build that community even more, to make those options available to more families. And with that, thank you, good night, and God bless.